Hi, and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. I'm your host, Rochelle Kuramoto. Join me each week for masterclasses and conversations about the skills and experiences that matter most to startups in the innovation economy. You will hear from subject matter experts and founders. We're here to inspire, inform, and occasionally even entertain you. Let's get started. On this episode, we welcome Sally-Anne Airey, a leadership coach and the founder of Skillful Leaders. She guides leaders and teams to align personal and professional aspirations. Sally's 4-decade career includes 23 years in the Royal Navy, where she achieved the rank of commander and became the Navy's first serving mother. Following her naval service, she transitioned into international business and leadership coaching and developed the Mindful Command framework, which integrates principles of mindfulness and leadership. Her book, Mindful Command: The Way of the Evolving Leader, shares these insights and her extensive experience. In this deep discussion, Sally-Anne shares the 4 concepts of leadership, actionable steps, and a powerful personal example. This is an episode for anyone who manages day-to-day stresses and all of the pressures that come with being a leader. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. Today, we are so fortunate to have with us a special guest, Sally-Anne Airey. She is a leadership coach and the founder of Skillful Leaders, where she guides leaders and teams to align their personal and professional aspirations. We've asked her to join us today because as startup leaders, we so often are fueled by purpose and burdened by tasks. And so we're going to have a great conversation about different pillars and ways to sort of operate effectively. Sally-Anne, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Rochelle.
Absolutely. So you have one of the more fascinating and inspiring personal stories of leadership, and actually of leadership and courage, that I have read in a very long time. And I would love for you just to take a few minutes to share your story with our listeners.
Well, thank you very much. And, you know, when I look back at my life and my work, at the heart of it all has been my fascination with leadership and what works and doesn't work. That's what I'm deeply pragmatic, actually. And for me, what matters is that the thing works. And I think I thought about a number of things in my life that have taught me a lot, from which I've learned a lot. And the first was that my first career was in the Royal Navy. And over those 23 years, and I left as a commander, it taught me a lot about leadership. I also have twin sons who are now adult. I have twin stepdaughters, and that taught me a lot about parenting. And then I got divorced, remarried, moved countries, and that taught me a lot about myself. And we lived in Eastern Europe for 8 years, in Russia and Ukraine, and that taught me a lot about business and coaching and different ways of seeing the world. And then, about 12 years ago, we moved to the mountains. We now live in the French Alps, and it's like it all came together. And we ran a hospitality business for 10 years. And 3 years into that, I started running retreats too for leaders. Because what I realized is that leadership is an inside-out affair. Good leaders lead themselves first. And to do that, we need to create the space to be with ourselves and to find a kind of calm center so that we can think straight. So after a few years of coaching leaders and running retreats for leaders, I decided to bring them together into one cohesive experience that enables leaders to align who they are with how they lead. So you're not changing yourself, you're figuring out who you are and how you bring that to your leadership. And this is the journey from the inside out, if you like, and it needs time and space and patience and trust. And I know this because I've had to learn that too. I'm actually naturally pretty impatient. And there are times when impatience is extremely useful, and there are plenty of times when it's not so great. And so over the years, I've experimented and explored and worked with all of the things that I teach to leaders today. And I only teach the things, if you like, that worked for me in all of those experiences that I've described. And the guide to all of this in the last 12 years has been, if you like, the mountains. So when I look to the mountains, I get a sense of the qualities of being stable and grounded and accepting what is so that you can work with what is on the ground. And I've just found that the good days are when I'm able to do that.
Wow. Well, I hope that the people who are joining us today are joining us on YouTube and can see the person behind this story, because as I look across the camera at you, your presence is so quiet and so calm. And I hear a story like that, the Royal Navy, two sets of twins, living in Russia and Ukraine. I feel like you've earned this life in the mountains, but you're like I am, I think, kind of a diminutive, statured person. And yet what a life, Sally-Anne. My goodness, I would imagine that the leadership skills that you impart from your own experience are incredibly deep and rich. And so I'm so excited for this conversation. You've written a book, The Mindful Command, The Way of the Evolving Leader, that explores this essence of effective leadership. And I would love for you to share with us the sort of four pillars or core concepts of leadership that you talk about, in that book.
Yeah, so just for, if I may, for a moment, mindful command, where does that come from? So you
Yeah.
might imagine from what you've just heard that it's bringing together my experience as a commander in the Navy
Mm.
and my mindfulness practice, which I've been best part of 20 years now that I have a meditation practice. And because they're both part of who I am, that's what I brought to my leadership framework. And the command part of mindful command speaks to the military concept of commander's intent and mission command. Commander's intent is the clarity of whoever the leader is, at whatever rank, or it doesn't matter, high or low, whoever's got the initiative for any particular operation or task, they're the leader. And so it speaks to their capacity, ability to be clear, and also to be, to make sure that the team has the resources they need within constrained budgets, within the reality of the world, but nevertheless adequately resourced. And then clear enough that the people they're leading have freedom of action to execute the task so that they can bring their own self to what they do. So just to say that that's, if you like, the command part of mindful command. And the mindfulness part is the presence.
Mhm.
Because in the end, we're the ones doing it. Your audience, who, entrepreneurs seeking investment, what is the continuity? The continuity is them. So understanding how we can invest in ourselves, get to know ourselves, trust ourselves, be okay with ourselves. As the French say, be okay in your own skin.
Mm.
To not only have the idea, but follow it through. And that applies to leadership in any context. So you've asked me about the four pillars. I call them foundations. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
They are these. So the first one is a thing I call balanced awareness. So in leadership, in anything that we do, I mean, it sounds obvious, right? But awareness is very, very important. Self-awareness, understanding what's going on for us, what are we feeling, what are we thinking, how are we showing up? And also looking to the people we're with, either in negotiation or into collaboration or whatever it may be. Looking, who are these people? What's in it for them? What's at stake for them? How are they feeling? How are they thinking? How do I need to adapt my approach to where they are? And then the third part of balanced awareness is the context. And the context is everything. What you might do in one context might be a little bit different to what you do in another context, and it's important to be able to adapt to that. There isn't any one way, right? There are many different ways that you can approach a problem, and then it's about balancing self, others, and context to make the right judgment and the right decision. So that's what I call balanced awareness, and it's, I think, super important in decision making and leadership and self
Mm-hmm.
leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And we often forget it. We often see
Yeah.
things through
Yeah.
the lens of our subjective experience, right? We can't
Yeah.
help it. We're human beings. So we have to, it's important to step back and say, hey, hang on a minute. What's going on here? What's needed? Okay. That's the first foundation, if you like.
Yeah, and one of the components of that foundation that really stands out, as I hear you talk, is this piece of it is as they truly are. Seeing things, seeing yourself, seeing others, seeing the context as they truly are, not glossed over or shaded by emotion or expectation or anything like that. And we talk often about the importance of data and the importance of metrics, and all of those things I think can probably help with that. But to hear you pull it back to a fundamental willingness to be completely open and honest with your perception and your acceptance of what is around you and how you are operating within it is it's a good reminder for all of us who I think get very wrapped up in the pace of things and then look to the numbers to try to see things as they really are, when in fact what we should probably do is just remind ourselves to do that all the time without the crutch of of data.
Well, I mean, information comes from all different sources. So yeah,
Mhm.
data and so on, extremely
Mhm.
valuable to, can give you an accurate assessment of what's happening. And then there's the situation, there's where you are, who
Yeah.
you're with, who you're talking to. People buy people, right? They buy an idea and they buy the person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so looking after that is
Yep.
incredibly important. And being able to almost look at oneself as if, I call it an impartial observer.
Mm.
Well, we're never impartial, but we can try to be. And
Mhm.
this sort of balanced awareness triangle, as I call it, can help us do that. And so that we can be super realistic, not get carried away by our idealistic vision of what might be possible, which is super, is needed, it drives us
Yeah.
forward. And
Sure.
it does need to be tempered by a reality of what's possible, right? And if things seem difficult, how we get around them, how we work with them, how we negotiate those challenges. So yeah, just to echo what you were saying, really. Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. So let's keep going. What is the next
Okay,
foundation?
cool. So if we imagine then that we're, have this wonderful balanced awareness, let's imagine for one moment that we do, or at least we're trying to have it.
Yeah.
What then matters is that we're clear. I mean, it's
Mhm.
obvious, but
Mhm.
often gets overlooked. I call this clear purpose. It doesn't have to be a grand life purpose. It can be the purpose for the day or the week or
Mm.
the month or the year. But it's important to be clear. And so it's super important that we ask ourselves certain questions that might be really difficult to answer, which lead us to clarity. And in leadership, because that's my métier, it's what I do, um, I think of clarity as the first principle of leadership. Because if the leader isn't clear, how can you expect anyone to work with you or much less follow
Mm.
you? So we have a way uh, on our leadership program of teaching clarity that is absolutely watertight. And so that's a big part of the framework. And the third pillar or foundation is a thing I call fearless compassion. And if any of the people listening in here know of Tara Brach's work or Kristin Neff's work, they talk about radical compassion and fierce
Mhm.
compassion. It's a bit like that, but it's my unpicking of what gets in our way. There we are with a great idea. What is it that enables us to fulfill this idea? And what is it that holds us back? And what holds us back is usually something fear-based. And we might not think it. We might say, I'm not afraid. But, and yet, there's somewhere down in a deep tangled root, there's something. And so what I've found over the years is if we are harsh with ourselves, if we, I don't know, call ourselves dumb or stupid or whatever, why can't I do this? And why isn't it working? It doesn't help much. Normally keeps us stuck, or it sends us off in the wrong direction. So what I've found is, for want of a better word, being kind to ourselves, being compassionate, understanding that we're doing our best with what we have available in that moment. So let's just see how we can ease through this thing. Let's understand that we're frightened, that there's something we're lacking some kind of self-belief, and let's maybe with some help of a coach or a mentor or both, or a friend or whatever, let's just unpick this thing and work with it kindly. So that's fearless compassion, not the absence of fear, but the capacity to work with fear. And then the final element, pillar, foundation of the framework is what I call inner stability. And if you like, it's the bedrock of all the others, because when we have found our own sense of centered alignment, a sense of feeling stable and grounded, then the rest of them just work out a bit better. And the rest of them feed our inner stability as well. So these are 4 foundations, but they intersect. They're not linear. They don't go from one to the other to the other. They're all working in some way all of the time. And what matters, Rochelle, is that we find a way of embodying them. It's not a concept. It is a concept, but it's important that we embody the concept, and it kind of becomes how we approach things. And I've just found that when we can do that, we normally get a better outcome.
Yeah. I think that there is so much here for, leaders who are thinking about this on their own, but also thinking about it, to go back to the beginning, in context with others, and, not necessarily just as a leader, but also as a recipient of leadership. And, I am thinking so much as you talk about the way that we try very hard to support the entrepreneurs, who are, part of our portfolio, and, as very hands-on partners, and, sitting in the mud with them when they need to be, when they're sitting in the mud, and that's okay. That idea of fearless compassion, I think, particularly for entrepreneurs, these are inherently bold, courageous people. But
Yes.
anyone who has ever been a founder knows that there are those dark, late night moments where you're just like, I can't do this, and having the awareness of that, having the humility to accept fearless compassion as well in those moments, I think is a recipe for longevity.
Well, that as well, for sure. Not beating
Mhm.
ourselves up, and
Sure.
we all do it, don't we, as human beings? We have our moments where we do that. I could have done better. All the things. But it doesn't, the reality is that it doesn't help much.
No.
And
No.
so, as you said, sitting in the mud,
Uh-huh.
let's just be in the mud for a bit. This
Yep.
is a bad day. It will pass. We know. We have enough life experience to know it will pass. It'll come and go. It's one of those days, and let's be kind with it. It's part of the journey. That
Mhm.
kind of thing, yeah,
Yeah.
is so much more helpful.
Yeah. No, it's great. So these are incredible foundations, and I'm curious if there's a starting point or a through line that can kind of give us in terms of just how do we get going with all of this?
Yes, quite. Where do you start?
Yeah.
Well, where do you start? You start by learning how to pause.
Mm.
And now, doesn't that sound easy? It is simple. It is simple, but it's not easy.
Not easy.
Because
Yeah.
in Mindful Command, what we're largely commanding is our reactive self.
Mm.
That the way our brain has evolved over the years, all of the things that it's assimilated, the pathways that have been created. And what we know from neuroscientists is that our brains are plastic and we can change those pathways, but it does take effort. Sadly, it's not something we can kind of wish to happen. We have to do stuff. So I think of pausing, creating a pause as like a gateway to all of this, because we create a little bit of mental space, a little bit of emotional space to decide what our next step is. Rather than reacting, we pause and we consider. And probably what we then say is going to be a little bit more effective than what we would have said if we just reacted. So it's super simple, not easy. And what I do is I teach leaders a simple tool I call the pause tool. It's like a mindful moment, but I call it the pause tool because people respond quite well to that and they tend to do it. What matters is they do it. So it has simple 3 steps: pause, focus, breathe. It can take a minute and it can make all the difference. And from
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
we then look at the balanced awareness framework. Because you've
Okay.
paused, okay, let's take a step back. What is going on?
Yeah. You've got some space for clarity.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm guessing that some of that wisdom came from the parenting piece. I feel like I had those conversations with my children when they were little, like, everybody just pause a second,
Yeah.
just let's reset. So no,
Well,
I
that's a
I I,
very
I
helpful thing to
tease,
do.
but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I think that, you said it sounds simple, it's not easy. And in particular for leaders, startup leaders, and they're in a very fast-paced, high-pressure environment. They are accountable to, employees and maybe sometimes paying their payroll out of their own budgets. And they're accountable to investors and they're accountable to brand new audiences who, they're trying to satisfy. And so they're spending so much of their energy on what do others need and what does the situation need? What is the market? Who is my buyer? Can you speak to how leaders in situations like that, where that is just their day-to-day existence, how they can sort of manage that?
When you look at that scenario, and I recognize it well, when I
Yeah,
was
of course.
full-time working mother, single mother for a little bit, and a parent, managing all of that. Oh, I absolutely can empathize. And the worst thing we can do is get caught up in it all.
Mm,
We lose ourselves in all of it. As I alluded to earlier, the continuity is you. The continuity is the person, the entrepreneur, the leader, whoever it is that we're talking about here, whoever's listening, it's you. Your capacity to step back and see what's happening. And like you did as a parent, Rochelle, say, hang on, let's just pause for a moment. And everything is starting to wind up, right? So the worst thing we can do is get caught up in it. So when everything around it's like the Rudyard Kipling poem, when everyone around you is kind of going crazy. I'm paraphrasing, but be the one that can see it all. And it needn't, you don't have to disappear for hours on end to do that.
yeah.
You can just take a moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a leader, if you're running your company and people are looking to you and things are getting really difficult, it's even more essential.
Sure. Absolutely. Is it important for people to try to do all 4 of these fundamentals? Like, what happens if you skip a piece?
Oh, well, I think what happens is that when we pause, when we take a moment, when we step back and, look at what's going on,
Mhm.
and when we ask ourselves what is needed, which is the clarity piece, and when we recognize, oh my God, I'm really frightened right now, this is a scary moment, and when we ground our energy, and we're doing that as a oneer, all in the moment, all of those elements, then you're doing all four.
Mm.
Because if you miss one of them, it's not, it's better to do it a little bit than not at all. But if you miss one of them, you're kind of like missing part of the whole.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it seems like the first step, that ground laying, is probably the most important.
It's the pausing, because the
Yeah.
pausing is the gateway. Once
Yeah.
you've paused, you can then dance with the other stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like growing in a muscle,
Mm.
It needs practice. Most people don't like the word
Sure.
practice, but hey, there isn't any way around it. And let's call it something else if we don't like the word practice, but it's doing it, doing it.
Yeah.
So there are certain tools, certain things, certain frameworks that you do them over and over until they start to become automatic. And
Yeah.
then you just notice you've paused and you're stepping back and you're looking at the thing and you go, oh, okay, I'm doing that now.
Yeah. So you have advised many and many very impressive people, over the years. And I'm curious if you can share a story, a case study. These concepts sound like, once you've grasped them, could be really transformative. Is there a story that you can share with us of what that has looked like in your experience?
Well, you know what? I'm going to share a story of a time before I'd developed this framework, going back a good 20 years now,
Hmm.
where it went very wrong for me. It was a
Okay.
big learning that informed this work. So at the time, I was living and working in Ukraine, in Kiev, and I was the COO of a school that we were building and scaling. It was a time of great investment in Ukraine, actually, after the Orange Revolution, if that means anything to any of your listeners, back in 2005. And, things are very different now, but then it was a time of growth. So what happens is, time of growth, you know, companies invest, expat families come in, they need somewhere for their kids. So this is what we were doing. We were building an international school for expat families and Ukrainian families. And I was the business manager. I'd been the governor of the school. I was a parent-elected governor. It was a bit like a company, where the
Hmm.
board was the parents who were elected. Anyway, I was then asked to be the business manager, so I took that on. And COO equivalent, really. But what I didn't anticipate, because I was full of idealistic vision, I could see where we needed to go. I had loads of experience doing this kind of thing, and I could see it. What I didn't properly understand was the context. I didn't fully understand that there were lots of vested interests, loads of corruption,
Mm.
and what I can only describe as a labyrinthine bureaucracy. Okay, so the bureaucracy was almost impossible to understand and made difficult at every step and so on. And the corruption and vested interests kind of caught up in all of that. So the context was very difficult. Everything was a lot slower and a lot more difficult than it needed to be. And when I was when I took on the role as COO, I was working to a board member on the governing board who, it took me a while to realize, was absolutely determined that I should fail.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no, he was on a mission to sabotage everything I was trying to do. And it just took me a while to see it, right?
Yeah.
I was all caught up in my thing, what I was doing, and how
Yeah.
wonderful it was, and how we were going to save the world, right? Or at least save the parents and their kids.
Yeah.
So, so this guy was a narcissist. And I think he was probably, I'm not sure, but I guess he was a bit of a sociopath.
Mm.
And he was out to sabotage me. And I responded to it, reacted to it badly. I didn't see it clearly. I couldn't believe someone would do that, right? How could someone do
Yeah.
that? We're trying to do good here, for crying out loud. Why would you do that? But he did.
Yeah.
And long story short, he did get me out of that job. In the end, I resigned. And then I got nominated back onto the governing board, and then we moved in a different direction. So the story changed. And what I actually wanted to do as a COO didn't happen. And I know that if I could apply the skills that I have thought through and practiced and taught pretty much ever since, I'd have done a better job of it. So
Yeah.
that's my story of where it goes wrong
Yeah.
when you're not doing any of those things, right?
Yeah.
Does that,
Yeah.
probably a few people listening in here might be able to relate to something similar.
Oh, absolutely. I think, that there are parallels, many parallels to stories like that where, it might not be another person trying to sabotage you, but it may be market headwinds. It might be an
Yeah,
unexpected competitor. But the point is pausing long enough to have that clarity of vision and an objectivity to what you're observing, accepting the reality of all the things you're seeing so that you can actually address them.
quite. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolute brilliant summary there. No, totally that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, this conversation has been selfishly one of something that I know that I needed today, and I hope that our listeners will find the kind of fulfillment and just really useful thinking that I have today, Sally-Anne. Thank you so much. Where can people find and buy the book
Oh,
if they want to
well,
go deeper?
it's on Amazon. It's on
Great.
Amazon.com for
Okay.
your readers in your country.
Yep.
I also have recorded it, and it's on Audible. Quite a lot of people enjoy listening to the Audible version.
Yeah.
It's not a long book.
Yeah.
It's pretty short. It's pretty concise. It's
Yep.
pretty clear and simple. So somebody listened to it the other day on a journey. In fact, over in the States, he had I think they were going to an ice hockey game, and he listened to it in like 3 hours. So just to say, it's something that's pretty accessible. So
Awesome.
it's Amazon, Audible, and turns out I'm all over Google. I found out.
Well, we'll add some links in the show notes. Perfect. Perfect. And so I would imagine that people can just, find you on Google and everything as well. Are you also active on LinkedIn? Is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
another good way? Okay.
yeah. Not super active, but I'm on LinkedIn, and
Okay.
I enjoy participating when when that's something I want to do. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. Uh, yeah, they're the main ones.
Perfect. Well, Sally-Anne, thank you so much for your time and your generosity of thought. This has been a delight.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's been a huge pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Extraordinary Pursuits. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share the show. It helps others to find us. Now, let's go build the future of the innovation economy.